Today I'm going to show you how to make this.
Oh my, there's 1,000 miles between you and I. Oh my, just 1,000 miles between me and paradise. Oh my, oh my, 1,000 miles between me and paradise.
If you guys haven't checked out the cover yet, the link is in the description along with everything else that you'll need for this video. That includes a free download link of the FLP for this track, with all the presets, automation, MIDI files and samples, and all the instructions you need. I'm really excited to share this with you guys, and it's been a really powerful exercise for me to put it all together. Oh yeah, and welcome to the video everyone, it's Kobi McCoull. Now there's a lot to get through, so let's just jump into the breakdown. The first thing that should pop up for you will be this page with all of the information that you need about it and the link to the original video, including the terms and conditions. And it's broken down into the main sections. Each category required just as much detail and focus as the other, so let's just get straight in and we'll work from the top down. So starting off of course with the vocals, I just had the main line all the way through and then recorded background vocals that I pushed across to the left and right, and then used those sounds to create some reverse sounds and some atmospheres just to fill out the space, particularly in the drops.
Learn to be brave, see the other side. Won't you lead me there? Have no fear, close your eyes, find paradise.
When it comes to doing house vocals, I find it works really well for them to be very pushed, to be very forward, have a lot of saturation and distortion. And here is the first and one of the most important points of the whole thing, is that it is always about what it sounds like when everything comes together. This applied with the drums, the vocals, the sound effects, all of those things. It was almost dangerous to solo something because then your ears would start tuning into what it sounded like isolated, and that's not what it sounds like when it's with everything else. Take for example the background vocals. When you listen to them on their own, they sound chopped and sliced. I've cut out syllabants and I've compressed it quite a lot. I've pushed it hard left and right. It kind of just sounds dirty and rough, but then when you pair it with the main vocal,
1,000 miles between me and paradise. Oh, paradise. Oh, my.
it actually provides this really nice shimmer and texture which it almost needs in order to compete with the rest of the instruments and the drums in the drops especially. I'm not going to pretend for a second that this is identical or can even compete with the final version that MEDUZA and Dermot produced, because it's just stunning. It sounds so good at all volumes. That's another aspect which was challenging, is to get it to sound good when it's quiet, but also for it to hold itself together when it's really loud. And that is where listening to it as a unit becomes so important. So both of the main vocal and the background vocals are sent to an individual channel here and then separated out using sends down at the bottom to a reverb, another plate reverb and a delay. Then those are bussed together, so the vocal effects bus is here and the main bus is there. I then sidechained the main vocal to the vocal effects and used sidechain compression to control it so that when the main vocal came in, it would push down the vocal effects just a little bit so that it would give the main vocal more presence and clarity. And although I was using that compression to control the vocal effects, I also used automation to push up the delay and the reverb and change it in different sections. Moving on to the drums, which is your house foundation, pun very much intended. And the main driver is just this heavy house kick. And I actually have two because they change slightly from the verses to the drops. I just have the main driving 4 on the floor all the way through. I also have an offbeat counter kick which I've pushed up higher. This could also be done with a tom or just some other percussive element. It was important that the volume of that was pushed down significantly, because if they were all the same volume, it wouldn't have that bouncing movement. It's too much, it just overwhelms. So I needed it to be so that the emphasis came back to the 4 on the floor and the top one just acted like an accent. But the kick that I had for the drops was bigger, heavier and pretty significantly distorted. The secondary kick is the one that I used in the verses and the quieter parts, but the main kick is the one that I used in the drops. And I've used these pre-computed effects within the sample here to clip it and boost it just a little bit to give it some really nice saturation. Now again, like I say, this sounds nuts on its own, and actually I was tempted initially to EQ the kick quite significantly because I thought, well, there's way too much high end there, but that was me making the mistake of listening to it on its own. When I then put everything else in, I found myself pushing that EQ back up again because suddenly it needed the high end and the saturation. So it's so context dependent. Then in the drops, one of the most significant things and easily overlooked aspects are the ride shakers cymbals, all the high tops, because they carry so much energy. And if your drops don't have enough of that energy, then no matter how hard your kick is and how powerful your vocals are, it just won't feel like it has that height that these elements create.
Oh, paradise. Oh, my, paradise.
It just feels like it's really lacking everything.
Oh, paradise. Oh.
They make up so much of the energy along with the sound effects that I have down at the bottom, and it just suits this style so much. Now before we go on, I just wanted to say thanks for all the growth recently and all the love and support in the comments. I really appreciate it. And the YouTube analytics tell me that a lot of you are watching but aren't yet subscribed. And if you guys value this content, then please do feel free to click subscribe. It helps me to keep making these videos for you all and also supports me and my music. Now as you'll see, I've pushed them ever so slightly to the right and the left because you want to keep space in the middle for the vocal. And then you can see with the shakers here, I've created some separation, and the same with the cymbals. What you notice when you analyze a really full professional track is all the little subtle details that make all the difference. I could have spent way longer just adding in those subtleties and playing around with the different sounds. The little hat extras and Foley. Then the final element of the drums was just getting a band pass where I would automate that up within the mixer here, just to fade the drums out to make a smoother transition from the drop sections into the verses. And of course the drums once again were sent all to their individual channels here so that I could treat them all individually and then bust together here. And then I ran them through some relatively heavy drum compression just with Fruity Compressor. And then also have a volume automation where I would push the drums up ever so slightly in the drops just to make them even more powerful and pull them down in the verses so that they weren't overpowering. Then moving on to the sub, which was a relatively simple element that I pieced together with Serum. I took the original sounds from an Echo Soundswork patch and just tweaked everything so that it suited the original sound. I did so by changing the filter and how much it would move up and down. The drive, the resonance within this filter, that gives it that kind of wow wubby sound. But then also changed the number of voices of unison just to give it a bit more depth and separation. I added in this sub element here just to make it a little bit thicker, and then within the effects added some distortion just to give it more presence. Then moving on to the most classic sound from MEDUZA, main lead, and I actually had to process that main lead quite a lot for it to sit well with everything, especially in the drop. So if I take all of the processing off, it's actually really loud and a massive sound, and that was probably one of the most challenging parts about mixing all of this, was trying to get the lead to sit well without it being too overpowering but without it becoming too thin. And I think I could have spent quite a bit more time working on that so that it really came through well overall. The original sound is really simple to piece together, and there are some great tutorials on YouTube already as to how to make it from scratch, so I won't go into that just now. The first oscillator is the most significant, but the other one also just adds a little bit more richness to it. Where the most power comes in within this sound is the compression and the chorusing. If I take those off, the sound just sounds insane. But when you add the chorus on, that's done a lot of the groundwork already to take it to that classic MEDUZA style, and then the compression just really pushes everything up. Then I did a pretty significant amount of EQ along with distortion and some wave shaping just to make it sit well with everything. I have two different EQs that I automated throughout the track so that this lead would behave itself next to everything else. In the verses and the quieter sections of the song, I have a high cut EQ that I've pushed up so that it will pull away some of the overpowering tones and make everything a little bit more dark and mysterious, and I then pull that off so that all the high end comes in. So it's much more muted in those smaller sections, and that's been done with this EQ here. And then it's much bigger and more grand in the drops. But then you can see in the final parts of the drops, I have a low cut to remove some of the low end so that it's not competing too much with the bass. And I just push them up and down appropriately throughout. So there's the high cut and there's the low cut. and they just do their thing all the way through. And like I say, the presets for all of these will be in the free FLP, so I hope you guys have fun playing around with those. The rest of the instrument elements I created using Omnisphere, and they are all just to provide atmosphere, swell, movement, and none of them really dominate too much. This is almost like a high string, just to create that type of atmospheric tension that you get in lots of the things like the Spider-Man movies and so on. It just creates this suspense overall. But then I also put it into the final drop just to give everything the shimmer that that atmosphere creates. Now this pulse sound here I created using a Juno pad. It's got some really nice thick low end, but one of the questions that I think it's important to ask yourself all the time in order to get a decent mix with these kinds of things is, what purpose is it serving in this context? And the purpose I wanted this to serve was to create the kind of bouncing swell in the high end, not in the low end. Once again, I used an EQ just to control the low end of it. In the sections where there was more space for it to dominate, I would leave the low end in, but in the drops and so on where I really needed to try and control the low end, I just removed it and let the sub and the kick take care of the low end. And then the final element in the instruments I added was this really luscious pad. Which once again sounds great all on its own, but when you combine it with everything else, I needed to do quite a bit of EQ.
Eyes find paradise, paradise, paradise. Close your eyes, find paradise.
And that brings me on to the final element, which was the sound effects. These just do even more to enhance the quality of the story that's being told. They just tell you, oh, everything's building right now. Oh, everything's falling. It works alongside the cymbal crashes from the drums. Some of the original sounds themselves already had a sidechain ducking, and then the other ones I just used gross beats to do more or less the same thing. They weren't just useful in the drop, they were also used in the verses, but just more subtly.
Won't you lead me there? Have no fear. Close your eyes, find paradise, paradise, paradise.
And they also pair really well with these reverse reverb vocals. And I put those reverse reverb vocals all the way through in different sections. One of the most important things to get everything to sound well together was, of course, just the volumes of it all. Initially, I thought that the kick and the sub weren't working together, but it was actually just that the sub was too loud and the kick wasn't loud enough. But another element within that is also the key or the tone of each of the things that you're putting in. For example, the kick here sounds significantly different depending on what note it's being played on. So although I wouldn't recommend necessarily listening to those things on their own, what I would recommend is muting some of the other elements and just comparing specific elements side by side, like the kick and the bass alone. The same goes for the clap. They all have a tone of some sort, and you have to try and make sure that they are all in a ballpark region, otherwise you'll end up with things that sound like they don't belong. So that was that. I really hope that you guys enjoy playing around with the FLP. Please do let me know if you have any questions or problems. And if you guys are enjoying it, I'd love to hear from you. Just let me know down below in the comments or send me a message on my Instagram. Overall, this was such a powerful exercise to help enhance my production skills, my mixing and mastering, and really getting into the nitty-gritty details that take a track from pretty good to epic. Thanks again for all the love and support and for checking out the video. I really look forward to sharing the next one with you, and you can probably click on one of those right now. But until then, bye.
Oh, my, there's 1,000 miles between you and I.